Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, meet up with some of the really interesting and amazing people we get to interact with in this crazy world we're in of self-publishing our books and writing books. And today we have a guest who I'm really excited to speak to, because in some ways her life sounds like a romance novel of its own. It is Liz Alden, who is the author of the Love and Wanderlust series, which is a fantastic series of books. And she writes from a boat, which I just think sounds amazing. So we've got tons of questions for you, Liz. Thank you so much for coming on board. How are you doing today?
I am doing excellent. I love your little boat pun already. Coming on board the podcast, coming on board. Yeah.
I know. It's just when you have kids, immediately like the puns come, the dad jokes come. It's like gaining a superpower. And of course, we have the man himself, Craig Touch, founder and owner of Hidden Gems Books and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, this is a good talk. I'm really a fan of traveling. Before I had kids, we used to travel a lot. We still travel with them, but now it's kind of boring beach vacations, which I mean, I like them, but there's only so many times I can go to Jamaica and lie on a beach. I kind of miss the being able to travel the world and walk around and see things, which my kids would never be interested in doing at this point. So it's kind of really interesting that you do that for a living. You travel around the world. You live on a sailboat, and you write from that. So I think that's really I think there's probably a lot of authors out there that didn't even realize that was a possibility. So you might be opening up a world of new things for an author to consider when they're thinking about how they can live life on their own terms and make money and have a great time. So yeah, thanks for joining. And where are you now? Are you sailing the world right now?
Right now, I am back home in Texas visiting my family. So I was just in Houston for a week, and now I'm in Dallas with my in-laws. The boat is actually up in Rhode Island. And a kind of complicated aspect people don't think about when they consider living on a boat is that you have to be somewhere for hurricane season. And hurricane season is approaching. So we left the Bahamas about a month ago and have been up in Rhode Island preparing for the off season for us.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, I never think about hurricane season because I live in Canada and we don't and nowhere near the water, so we don't get hurricanes or anything like that. Never an issue. But yeah, that's true. I guess you have to think about stuff like that.
Yeah, we did spend a little bit of a summer in Nova Scotia, and of course that was the year that like one of the hurricanes did go up the East Coast all the way up towards Nova Scotia, and we were like, really? We came all the way up here? It's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, I don't live near there either, sadly. So how does this work? Like, because I'm not really clear. If you're on the boat in the middle of the ocean, I guess you don't need internet to write, and probably it's less distracting. But do you have like a Wi-Fi site? What is it, satellite? Or do you just only have Wi-Fi when you're near a port or something? Like, how does that work?
Well, this is really changing, and it's in the middle of a big transition for remote workers like myself with SpaceX coming. That's going to be really different, but I'll speak to what we have right now, which is a satellite service, which is like 250 kilobytes per second speed. So not a whole lot of internet browsing or YouTube watching going on there. We are basically sending and receiving text-based messages and text-based emails. So when we're out at sea, I forward all of my emails to our satellite phone, and most of them end up not being deliverable because they're too big. So it's very limiting right now, but SpaceX is bringing out their new satellite broadband service, and that's going to really be a game changer for people who are looking to have internet connection while sailing. So right now, when I'm out sailing, I don't have internet. Now, 95% of the time, I am on anchor somewhere, hopefully somewhere beautiful, and connected to the local cell phone service.
That's great. And I mean, one of the advantages, I guess, is 95% of success in writing is not procrastinating because of the internet.
Yeah, and the difficulty with that is if I am sailing, I'm typically a little bit seasick. So writing is pretty much out for me. I use that time to read in my genre and read craft books, but I don't get any writing done when we're sailing. It's too difficult.
Wow. So you're a person who gets seasick but chose to live her life on a boat. That is an interesting choice.
I am surprised how many people do get seasick and continue sailing. Now, I am not someone who gets like physically ill, like I'm hugging the toilet or anything, but I just am uncomfortable and a little bit like antsy or a little nauseous, depending on the weather. It amazes me that people can't keep their lunch down and go sailing across ocean, but I definitely know people who do, and I am not that strong.
I've been on some. I mean, I don't know how big your sailboat is, but I've been on some sailboats, and I imagine that hugging the toilet in a sailboat is not something you want to do, regardless. That's more about I'm going to just put my head over the rail and let loose that way.
Yep, it is really uncomfortable.
I'm surprised you can read. I imagine seasickness is, I don't know, similar to car sickness, in the sense that, the same sort of things are triggering for it. And usually I thought reading was difficult to do for people that are car sick. And I would have thought seasick as well. But it's funny. So you're saying you can read, but you can't write. I'm surprised there's so much of a difference there.
Yeah, I actually can't read in the car, but I can read on the boat. I don't know why. I think some of it might have to do with like I sit up at the helm and I have fresh air coming in and a good view of the horizon, which I know is really important. So that works for me, and reading in the car does not. I don't know what it is.
So, okay, so how does the writing work then? So you wait until you dock and then get all your writing done, and about sort of the things you've seen and the experiences you've had. I imagine that's going to factor into a lot of your writing, which we see by some of your books. They're always set in places that are exotic to most of us, but just old hand to you, I guess.
Yes, so all the books in the Love and Wanderlust universe are based on my travel or experiences or what I've seen while I've been out in the world. And it's been a really fascinating way to kind of tell my own story, but a fictionalized version of it, and in a setting that speaks to me as my love for speaks for me as my love as a romance reader. I'm not sure that's coming out right, but I've been able to fictionalize it in this way that brings romance into the story while still exploring exotic destinations, which has been a lot of fun. They say, write what you know, and this is how I've managed to do it.
Now, I was going to ask, you're actually fairly recent in romance writing, aren't you? You started in 2020, is that correct?
Yes, my first book published in 2021 in April, so it's been a little over a year. I did try to start writing back in 2018. I flunked my first NaNoWriMo. And then I kind of got more involved in the writing community and started to understand what it took to really write a successful novel. And then I tried again in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And that was what eventually became The Hitchhiker in Panama.
And one of the things that really impresses me is like your books are extremely strong right out of the gate. I mean, I always joke about I've written 11 full-length novels before I got my first successful one. But your books, they're very well. The covers you've got, like they fit right in alongside Tessa Bailey and stuff like that. Even the taglines, like they're perfect, where you kind of sell up front what it is. It's like The Rival in South Africa is an only one bed romantic comedy. And I mean, if you're a romance reader, you know exactly what that means. I think the first one, The Hitchhiker in Panama, you've even got, you know, cinnamon roll romance, because if you're a romance reader, you know what cinnamon roll is.
Yes, yes. I definitely have a few consistent devices in my books, and cinnamon rolls and only one bed are massively one of them. And I from a reader's perspective, because I read so much romance and I've been reading romance for years, I love that aspect, and that approach that's taken to romance novels is really putting out there the tropes that you're hitting, because some of them are just catnip. Enemies to lovers, only one bed. Wow. Sign me up. I am in as a reader. And so I try to portray that same way as an author.
I love that. And your reviews have been, I mean, like really, really strong all the way through. So what do you think it is that readers like about your books?
I think that there's a unique aspect to it. And, you know, some advice given to authors is that unique is not necessarily a good thing, because people are looking, especially in romance, for like a consistency. But that was what I thought going in, maybe, you know, not really knowing what I was doing in the beginning so much, but I thought, well, this is a unique story. This is a story that I can tell about myself. Now, as for the quality of my books, like from the starting gate, I got very lucky with having excellent writing groups that would critique my works. And that has been, you know, the first draft of The Hitchhiker in Panama was very different from the book that I published, just in that I wasn't really learning a lot about plot structure and like romancing the beats. But my critique partners and my early writing groups were really extremely influential with that for me. I did also hire a developmental editor from Reedsy, who is very familiar with the romance genre, and she has been fantastic for really helping me polish my books and get them to the point that they are. And I am really proud of how well they've done, and it's so exciting to have people be I would call them super fans this early on in my career, and that's a lot of fun and very, very rewarding.
And you're doing it all from a boat in the middle of the ocean. That's
And
even better.
Wait,
doing it all from a
wasn't that
boat,
the plot of Romancing the Stone in the 80s with Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas?
You know, that has been advised or recommended to me so many times, and I haven't watched it. I really need to, clearly.
Yeah, I saw that, I mean, how many years ago? I sort of remember it, but I don't really. I remember liking it, but...
Yeah, it's literally a romance writer who lives, because it's a sequel, who lives in a boat and writes. Anyway, I will stop talking about obscure 80s movies.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting to think of romance writers as main characters, because we do have a lot of romance novels who have romance writers as main characters, and it kind of provides like multiple interesting layers and intricacies to their lives because of what they do and the flexibility it provides in their life. And that's one of the things that makes it work for me, is that as a writer, you can be writing and marketing your books from anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. So yeah, there's no reason why people can't up their lives and go live on a sailboat.
And so you've put yourself in all your books too. So I assume that's you swinging on the vine on the cover of The Hitchhiker in Panama, right? You and Tarzan.
Me and Tarzan.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think probably a lot of romance writers would say this. There's a little bit of me in all of my heroines, and there's a little bit of my husband in all of my heroes. I actually, for subscribers of my newsletter, they have access to all of my bonus material, and that includes behind the scenes looks. So I have a picture of my friend in Panama climbing up a vine while we were doing a hike. So that you know is based on a real story of something that I did while hiking in Panama, and that's how it happens in the book. The characters are on a hike and there's vines and the hero climbs up it. So like I know that can really happen because I've seen it and experienced it. Now
I was gonna well, I was gonna ask if you I imagine obviously when you're traveling the world to all these exotic locales, you're taking a lot of pictures, and since you're writing about a lot of this stuff, do you incorporate any of those? I know a lot of romance books, they don't have pictures in it, but I was thinking maybe that's something you would include at the back or something, whatever. But maybe it's you've done it even better, where you've made it sort of this bonus extra for people signing up for your newsletter, which is a fantastic idea, I think.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it helps me kind of talk about my books, especially in the time leading up, like in the pre-order period. I get to say, with my most recent release, which is a short story in an anthology called Summer Vacation, my story takes place in Indonesia, in Bali and in Komodo. So to my newsletter subscribers or to my Instagram followers, I've been sharing photos of Komodo dragons or photos of snorkeling with manta rays to kind of promote like this travel wanderlust aspect of my series.
And I'm sure it adds, a great level of authenticity. It's one thing, if I want to write a book about Panama, I can go on the internet, I can do some research, right? But I'm not going to have that same level of immersion that you're going to have, where you've been there and you've traveled and you can talk about the actual streets that you're on, or the hotels that you're staying in, or the waterfalls and the vines that you're climbing,
Yeah, definitely. It makes it a little easy to bring in all of the senses and all of the emotions to the story, I think.
Does that influence where you go? Like, which comes first? Do you go somewhere and say, okay, now I'm going to write a book about that? Or do you say, I want to write a book about this place, so let's go to this place?
All of my stories so far have been, well, I've been here, let me write about it. Someday it would be lovely to be like, well, I would like to write a story set here. Let me go, expense the trip to wherever and write my story after the fact. But no, it's all been based on my past travels so far.
I'm very interested in that. So in 2014, you and your husband were just like, okay, we're going to go on a boat, and for 6 years you traveled everywhere.
Yes, it was something we thought about doing for several years, and as you can imagine, it was quite a long process to sell all of our stuff and buy a boat and move aboard. We moved aboard in 2014, and our goal from the get-go was to do a world circumnavigation, which we finished in March of 2020, right as COVID was hitting, amazingly. We arrived in Antigua in the Caribbean and crossed our wake from 4 years and 3 months prior. So we have literally sailed completely around the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, when a pandemic hits, a boat in the middle of the ocean is where you want to be.
Yeah, when we left Brazil to sail, I believe it was 14 days from Brazil to the Caribbean. When we left Brazil, there was like the first few cases of COVID in Rio, and we were like, oh, that's really far from us. But when we were underway, we were using that really slow internet connection to message with our family, and they were like, well, this has been canceled and this border is closed and there are more cases. So it was a very bizarre time to be out at sea, because we don't have the connection that keeps us informed on the news. But yeah, I saw shirts that said, sailing, practicing social distancing before it was cool. So that's exactly what happens. We're out at sea for 14 days and not in contact with anyone. And once we get onto the Caribbean, it was like, we know without a doubt that we do not have COVID. There's no possible way that we've gotten it from anyone, and we've incubated and we are good to go. Now, some of the countries' bureaucracies doesn't really tailor to that. So we know people, for example, who sailed from Tahiti to Australia during the pandemic, and Australia still said, well, you need to quarantine for 14 days. Never mind the fact that you've been alone on a sailboat for 3 weeks. The bureaucracy just isn't in place to parcel out cruisers who have been isolating versus people who are flying in or people who are coming in on cruise ships or something. It's a very bizarre I mean, it's a
I
bizarre
guess
time for everyone, but yeah.
I guess, there's got to be that level of trust too, right? Just because you say you haven't, you've been on a boat quarantined and no chance you have it, they don't necessarily know if that's true. So they've got to take precautions, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Although in this day and age of technology, most boats have trackers on them, and you have your formality paperwork that you're using to prove that you've cleared in and out of countries. So it would be not that
But
people
don't
don't
you
try.
but don't you have to, I mean, I don't know how big your boat is, but like, don't you have to occasionally stock up? So you got to go to port and buy supplies, which means that you're sort of interacting with people, or is that, I don't know how that works exactly.
So for like our sail from Brazil to the Caribbean over 14 days, that was nonstop. We were not stopping anywhere to provision. We'd done all of that in advance. And yeah, it's really, on a small boat like ours, you're just kind of going.
Yeah, that's
Well,
amazing.
you must get on with your husband if you're willing to be on a boat with him for 14 days straight, or not interacting with anybody else. I'm pretty sure my wife would murder me.
That's something people bring up a lot. And yeah, the question is like, how do you do that? In The Hitchhiker in Panama, they set out across the Pacific and it's 5 people on the boat. And there are difficult crew dynamics, and they're out at sea for 25 days. My husband and I did the sail across the Atlantic in 26 days. And it's, I mean, never mind like ocean crossings where you're with each other all the time, but my husband and I are with each other 24/7 in our regular life, like 365 days a year. There's hardly any time apart, and we are on a 44-foot sailboat, which is kind of big for 2 people, but when you're thinking about like living space, it is essentially a tiny home. And we don't get out of it on a 14-day ocean crossing, like you do not leave.
And that's, I think, why a lot of your books are centered around forced proximity, right?
Absolutely. That is a big trope I like to hit. And yeah, the first 3 books in the series all take place on sailboats. So there is definitely that forced proximity aspect. And then you mentioned The Rival in South Africa earlier. That one's on a safari. So you are in a tent, sharing a tent with someone. And again, that only one bed trope. So you have these shared experiences and this opportunity to experience in depth what your partner is going to be like.
Yeah, you kind of want to know that before you buy a boat.
Or before you commit long-term to a relationship,
Yeah. But
But
people have their jobs and they go off and they see each other, for a certain amount of time. But with a boat, it's like we're all in.
Yep, exactly.
But in the same vein, you two share such unique experiences together that nobody else in the entire world can even like. Because if you go out every day, then you have your work relationships and the other relationships and stuff, and you each have independent lives. And but to do that together, you share such adventures that must create a really strong bond.
Yes, it does. And it's interesting how our retrospective view has changed, because now it's like, well, if you're thinking about something that happened in your past, you say, well, I think that was in like 2019, but maybe, I don't know, we were living here and that was a broad range. For us, it's like, oh, I remember because that happened while we were in Tonga, and we were in Tonga in June of 2017. So therefore, we know exactly when that scenario happened. It kind of narrows everything down to where you were when something happens. And often in a broad perspective, we look at each other quite frequently and say, can you believe that we've done this? Like, we have sailed around the world and we've been to all these amazing places, and we're constantly reminded of places we've been and things that we've done that have just really have made us so fortunate.
Now, I was going to ask about the practicalities of writing. It's like, okay, so what do you write on? Do you have a laptop? Do you have a pad? Do you write on your phone? What's the what's the rule there?
I have a laptop, which is where I do most of my writing. I think the most unique aspect of my writing style, based on my lifestyle, is that I'm a big fan of habit forming and developing a schedule, and that is really hard to do in my lifestyle. There are some mornings where I would love to get up every day and get immediately to work, but we have to move the boat because of inclement weather coming, or we have to clear out of the country, or we are under sail. And so when I wake up in the morning, I'm feeling nauseous and I can't write. So I never really get to have a consistent schedule that I would like, and that really benefits a lot of writers. But you know, that's something I've sacrificed, and I have to work extra hard at that, I think.
That's funny
how
because
do you cope with that? Oh, go ahead, Craig.
Well, no, I was gonna say that, you know, it's funny because that's actually what I would think would be the opposite case. And I mean, I get why it's that way for you because of the seasickness, but if a person who didn't get seasick did this and lived their life on a boat, and most of the time they were sailing, being able to stick to a schedule would be so much easier because you wouldn't have anywhere else to go, any other things to do other than, you know, making sure you're on course and whatever else you have to do as a sailor, which, you know, other than being a pirate, I don't have a lot of experience seeing, but you would have, like, you'd be able to say, okay, you know, I can do all my boat stuff at this time, and I can write at this time, and then you know, so you would, I would think, have the ability to have a really rigid schedule, but because you can't even write on the boat, and that's where the majority of your time is spent. So what do? Do you end up docking and then running to a Starbucks in Tonga, or you know, or can you write on the boat when you're docked, or is it still because it's moving with the waves and everything?
Yeah, so most of the time on the boat, we are at anchor, and like 95% of the time. So that is fine for me to write most of the time, unless we're like in really inclement weather. And yeah, I mean, when I'm out at sea sailing, I would love to be able to write because my day is fairly open. The boat is doing her thing typically, and we don't have to put a lot of work into it. But the seasickness thing really kicks my butt. So, you know, that's like 8 hours a day of lost productivity where I could be writing. But yeah, during times when we're in locations, we're at anchor or we're at dock, writing is much easier. Now, like I said, there's a lot of things that we have spent time in on land, in staying in Airbnbs where my husband and I both are working from home, basically. And that's been great. That's like really a consistent schedule, and we get a lot of writing done. But on the boat, there's so much to do to maintain the lifestyle. We are always having to think ahead, and we have a project list. So our boat is essentially like a job. And when we need to repair something, it's, you know, taking multiple trips to the store, and there's not a Home Depot or a West Marine nearby. So we have to, it's a much more involved process to get anything done as opposed to like a small home improvement project. And then there's just the other aspects of the lifestyle, like clearing out or weather, or, you know, also enjoying it. Like there are certain things that we don't want to miss out on just because we're both working from the boat. So it does make it really hard to create a schedule. I try the best that I can. Right now I'm doing a through the Wide for the Win Facebook group. I'm doing a 100-day writing challenge, you know, where you're just trying to write 250 words a day. And it's a little bit easier because we're on land, although right now we're visiting family and doing a lot of things. But trying to build that consistency level on the boat is really hard, and it's something I'm still struggling with. When I started writing The Hitchhiker in Panama, that was when we arrived in Antigua and everybody was going into lockdown, and we were not allowed to get off the boat. So that was like, wow, okay, I'm going to win NaNoWriMo this month because there's very little else that I can do. I can't go for walks or go hiking or go snorkeling or do any of the things that I would do for fun. And we're not having social hours. We're not able to get access to boat parts to do projects. So it was like, that was a game changer for me for a while. I think I would say I really thrived under COVID in terms of my writing. And that led to being able to publish so many books in the short time frame that I have.
If you're not able to get,
Oh,
sorry, my question is not really related to writing, but it's more again, all these things you're saying, I'm just thinking about this, like, how does that seem more? If you're not able to leave the boat and you dock somewhere and you're on this like massive trip around the world or wherever, I mean, how do you provision? Like, say you were docking because you're out of food and they're like, yeah, you can't get off the boat, so what? And it's not like you can order it, can you? I mean, it's not like you can call up Uber Eats and say to bring me a bunch of boat supplies to my boat.
It was a little complicated. In Antigua, we actually stayed in Antigua for 2.5 months. And we knew it was coming, that lockdown was coming, and thankfully they didn't have any shortages. So we stocked up the boat really well. And then after, I think 3 or 4 weeks, they were allowing people on shore certain times of day to get groceries. So it was a complicated thing to balance, but during the early stages of the pandemic, we were pretty much stationary on the boat, not really going anywhere. Some people did, but it made it really complicated to be clearing into countries and quarantining and then having to get supplies. And yeah, it was a very complicated time for boaters.
Wow. All right, go ahead, Roland. I'm sure your question is much more relevant.
Well, I think it's funny. I'm really interested in all of the things that you've done successfully that add up to how you've been able to achieve quite a lot of success in quite a short amount of time. And I guess consistency is one of those things. Because I know my periods when I've been earning the most, when I've been, sitting down writing 2,000 words a day every single day. If you do that and you have the ability to improve your writing, you really can't fail. So how do you overcome the challenge of having the not being able to schedule these things? Because I want to know, because I have 3 kids and I'm home all the time and it's going to be the summer holiday. So if you could teach me, I would appreciate it.
For me, one of the big successful things has been NaNoWriMo. And so in that first year, in 2020, I did all 3 NaNoWriMo programs. So that was April, July, and November. And setting that goal and the deadline, like the July one was especially hard because we did sail from Antigua up to Norfolk, Virginia. So, that was like a week where I couldn't write. But as the end of the month approached, I was like, I am going to win this month, even if it means that I have to write 7,000 word days towards the end. Like I'm self-motivated enough that I could say, well, I really want to do this. It also helps me to have the writing groups that I talked about earlier. Like I've been very fortunate to find good writing groups. And so to tell them and ask them to critique me and say, well, I'm going to have this draft to you by June 30th. So you are depending on me and I am going to get it done. And I treat my editors the same way. And actually in my last manuscript, I sent it to my, this was the player in New Zealand, my release that came out in March. I sent the manuscript to my developmental editor like just before midnight or after midnight, an hour after midnight. I said, well, I told you I was going to get it to you on this date and I'm an hour late. And she said, well, you're setting your own date. It's fine. And I'm like, no, you can't let me have that attitude. I have to, if I tell you as an editor that I'm going to get the book to you by X date, then that is what I'm going to stick to. And I am not going to let myself slide. So, some people say, well, I've been working on this book for 6 months and I'm getting close. And so my advice would be, book your editor. It doesn't have to be a developmental editor. It could be a copy editor, or it could be tell your friends, your writing friends, go ahead and book in a critique partner and tell them the date that you're going to get this manuscript to you and how many words it's going to, that you're going to get the manuscript to them and how many words it's going to be, and put that pressure on yourself. And that's not going to work for everyone, but it works for me, and that helps me get my books done and make progress.
So, are you a plotter or a pantser? You strike me as a plotter because you talk about romancing the beats and the structure and stuff. And do you structure your books out beforehand? And is that one of the things that might help you with the writing process? Because if you know what you've got to write rather than making it up as you go along, I find it helps.
I have tried really hard to become a plotter. It's not always super successful, but I think that in doing my first NaNoWriMo back in 2018 and failing, that was a really good lesson for me on why it helps to be a plotter. And what happened, and I have continued to have this ingrained in me with every draft that I write. I get to about halfway, like 30,000 words for a contemporary romance, and kind of like hit a slump. And that's what happened with my very first manuscript. Like I got to 30,000 words and I was like, well, I know that I need more, but I don't know where I'm going from here. And since then, you know, I've learned to plot better in the beginning, to figure out what my main beats are going to be. I write out the tropes that I'm going to use, which is, you know, just super important in romance, and to make sure that my character archetypes are going to mesh with those tropes. And then once this hasn't helped me not hit the halfway slump, but it has helped me figure out what to do when I hit the halfway slump, which is to stop writing because nothing's coming out, and then reread everything that I've written, kind of replot it out, and then figure out, based on romancing the beats or on my original plot, where I need to fill in the story and write more scenes and strengthen more beats of the book. So I'm trying to be a plotter. I get a little bit of plotting done, and then I pants it, and then I plot it again, and then I pants it some more, and I just kind of keep going until it works out.
Well, that's the important thing, is that it works out, that you get your HEA.
Yes, exactly.
So now that you've gone around the world, so what's the plan now once you get back on the boat? I know you're in Texas now, but once you start sailing again, you've gone around the world, so what else is there to do?
The moon.
Right.
Do it again, but faster.
There is a never-ending list of places that we want to visit. So we finished the circumnavigation in 2020, and because of COVID, that was just bizarre, and we ended up taking almost a year off of the boat. And then we cruised the Chesapeake Bay in the United States. We went down to the Bahamas in the winter, and so winter and spring are peak season for cruising the Bahamas. And then just last month, about a month ago actually, we sailed up to Rhode Island, which is where the boat is now. And this past year is kind of what it's going to be like for us for the next few years. We're going to spend the hurricane season on the East Coast, and then for the peak cruising season, we will head back south to the Caribbean, the Bahamas, somewhere around there, and like enjoy the winter as the cruisers. So it's interesting. We're going to get splitting our time between the two, the East Coast and the Caribbean. We'll get two very different experiences, and it's kind of a easier, more enjoyable cruising. Cruising around the world is like long ocean passages and dealing with a lot of bureaucracy and constantly being on the move. So we're trying to slow down a little bit, and that should hopefully help out my writing career a little bit more. And my husband also works from the boat a little bit, so we're trying to change our focus from the circumnavigation towards writing and what my husband does.
So what can I ask? What does he do? Because it seems like his potential jobs would be fairly limited, especially because your internet is so limited. I don't know. What would he do?
He drives the boat and hands you mimosas.
I'm going to tell him that's in his job description now.
Yes.
He does investing. He does our YouTube channel. We have a sailing YouTube channel, so he does all of that. And he also is working on a marine-related app with his brother. So that is a coming soon project.
Okay, so those are things that I guess you could do even if you don't have internet connection. You can film a video while you're on the boat and then just upload it. You know, once you have a better connection, you can code. You don't have to actually upload it to anywhere until you're at the port or whatever. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So where would you go if you aside from hurricane season there, what's your where haven't you been that you really want to get to and write a book about probably? Right?
We have not done probably the number one place I want to go that I haven't been is the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. And that is a little bit tricky to get to because of the way that winds and currents work on the west coast of the United States. So it would involve going through the Panama Canal again, which is a big commitment. So that's not something that's in our near future, but I hope that we'll be able to do that someday. Outside of the sailing, not that people don't sail up there, but I would personally not want to sail to Scandinavia. I would love to go see the Northern Lights, but our boat is not a cold weather boat and I am not a cold weather person. So getting the boat up there would be kind of miserable for me, but hopefully someday we can fly over and see all that.
Yeah, I guess there's a bunch of landlocked countries too that you're not going to get to see unless you actually fly over there or drive or something, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true, and something that a lot of people are surprised by, even though once you think about it, it makes sense. Like our trip with however many countries we've been to and all the years we've spent traveling is mostly coastal destinations. So we have a few times taken a train or flown into the center of a country or into a landlocked area, but we're by the water all the time, and that has its benefits and it has its limitations. So we get lots of beautiful beaches, but sometimes we're visiting places that are more all-inclusive resorts and beach bars when really we want the culture of the country that we're in, and we would need to go further inland to see those kind of things.
Yes, exactly. That was always my issue with going to the places that we end up going to with the kids. Before we had kids, we went on a cruise that stopped at a number of places, and in one country, I don't even remember which one it was now, but we got off the boat and it's on a cruise, so they're telling you, do this tour and do this tour and whatever, right? And those tours are always, well, A, they're super expensive, but B, they're just taking you to the tourist spots, right? So what we did was we went and we just found a cabbie and we said to him, show us the real island, take us to your places, show us what this place is all about. And that was one of the best things we ever did, because we went into these back areas and things that most tourists aren't going to see in that country. And he was showing us I think he drove by his own little house, and he took us to a market that he goes to, and it was so interesting to see that instead of what the cruise wanted us to see and buy and do, right?
Yeah, and we've been very fortunate to have experiences like that where we get to meet a local and they show us their version of the country, which is amazing and something that is really hard to have happen organically. And I totally feel you with the traveling with kids. That is a whole nother level of travel, and that is hard, and it may surprise you to hear that there are quite a few boats that have kids on board, traveling around with their kids, doing a circumnavigation with kids. Blows my mind. I have no idea how they do it. That's a whole other advanced class.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. But I think to go back to that, it's like, if you're traveling and doing this kind of thing and writing from your experiences, you kind of have to see the real side of it. Otherwise, you're not going to get the authenticity. People don't want to read. I mean, I guess it depends on your story, but if your whole story centers around all the touristy areas of the of the country, then it's not quite the same as if you're really immersed in telling them the real parts of the country. So I guess if it's a beach adventure, then that's fine. But if you're traveling through the jungles of Panama, you don't want to have only visited the shops that sell you the keychains about Panama.
Yeah. And I think there's it's something I kind of lucked into with the sailing romances that I wrote, because as sailors, we are often not in super popular places. So the jungle adventure is something that not many people who flew into Panama would do. But also in what I call like Wanderlust romances, the travel destination romances, you get the romances for people who are on vacation, and you get the people who are locals. And so within that, you have a sense like, well, I'm on vacation, it's temporary, or the built-in conflict of like, I am on vacation, you are a local and you live here, and like, how can we see this working in the future? Like, how is that? How are we going to get our happily ever after when we don't live in the same place? It's kind of a ingrained aspect of that romance genre.
Right. So before we wrap this up, do you have any advice for authors that are looking to sort of break into this travel romance lifestyle that you have mastered?
Well, I think it's wonderful to write about a place you've been, but I know that is not how everyone approaches it. I know some people who've written about places that they haven't been to, and then they go to visit that place, and it's almost like a cautionary tale, because they're like, oh, I could have included this little bit, and I wish I'd done that. And the one person I'm thinking of is a traditionally published author, so she doesn't have that opportunity to circle back and as easily update her book. But it's still viewing, even if you haven't been to a place, there, especially in the days and age of technology, there are so many people who have shared those experiences. So even places that I've been and I'm writing about, if I need a refresher, I am on Pinterest and I'm looking for, top things to do in Panama City or whatever to refresh my memory. And I also write a blog about my sailing adventures. So I've written that kind of history down, not just for myself, but for other people. So there's a lot of opportunities out there to approach new and different places, and kind of, we have people who are writing fantasy and sci-fi, or anything in the speculative area where you're doing a lot of world building. And that's not so different, or I mean, it's even harder than placing your story in a real world place, because there are so many resources nowadays. That first book that I tried to write in 2018 was set in New York City, and it was a place that I've been to and I've loved, but I was still going in and taking digital tours of the museums and doing my research to make sure the location fit what I remembered. And so there's, I wouldn't say that anybody needs to shy away from writing an exotic destination romance.
Well, I'm not hearing you there, Roland. Are you on mute? Yeah, you're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. No, we had the lawnmower here. Yeah, so but maybe sometimes the law of attraction takes you there eventually when you write about it. I've had the weird experience of writing about places that I hadn't been to and then going there. And
Yeah.
it's kind
Did
of
you, was there a moment where you were like, were you like seeing yourself as part of that story then? You know, like, how was that?
it was really interesting. And yeah, in some ways it was kind of, it makes you have an attachment to the story because you set it there for a reason, and then you go there eventually, and some things don't match your expectations and some things do, and sometimes you're like, oh, I did that quite well, good job. But I think that's what makes writing so nice. What is it, Anis Nin said, writers get to enjoy life twice, once the original time and secondly through retrospect, which I always like about that.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And I can see, like, one comes to mind, The Sailor in Polynesia, my second book. She's in my favorite place in the world, which is French Polynesia. So to be able to have lived snorkeling with reef sharks in the Fakarava Pass, and then to write it, and then to read it over and over again, you know, it's like how many times we reread our own books. That is getting to experience that place dozens of times, probably.
Oh, well, you know what? We are approaching the top of the hour, but what a wonderful way to wrap it up. It has been so lovely to speak to you, Liz, and like, so many interesting things to take away. I mean, I found it really valuable, the stuff you were talking about, you know, the writing schedule and going around. So thank you so much for joining us. Craig, do you have anything else to add?
I know. Thanks for telling us all this, and I mean, I have to go now and sell everything I own and buy a boat. So, but you know, thanks for explaining this, because I really think that this is something a lot of people will want to do, or at least, you know, even if they don't do it as a full-time thing, you know, to be able to, you know, even just schedule some of your vacations to places that, you know, you want to write, maybe take a little bit longer and do some of your writing while you're there. It's when you're really immersed in it, you know, and then maybe you can write it off. You know, I know that I did that once when I when I was writing, and I went to Vegas, as I did every year, and but that year I wrote a book set in Vegas, and I wrote that trip off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you decide to sell everything up and move on board, you know, give me a call. I'm happy to give some advice. So, yeah, it's definitely a different lifestyle, and it's been very rewarding, but also very challenging, and I'm fortunate to be able to do it.
Well, that is lovely. So, Liz, thank you so much. Now, where can people find your books? I mean, obviously, we'll put a link down to your website below, but if people are going to try and find you online, where would you want to send them?
Yes, my website is lizalden.com, so LIZALDEN.com. And by signing up for my newsletter, as I said, you get access to the behind the scenes photos and bonus epilogue and previews for all of my books. And then my books are available wide, so any retailer that you choose to find them, you can find the Love and Wanderlust series right now. And then I have 2 more series coming out this year.
That is wonderful. Well, Liz, thank you so much. If anybody is listening or watching, well, hopefully they are, don't forget to leave a comment down below telling us what you thought of Liz and all of the things that she's told us. Give us a thumbs up and a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And Craig and I will be back with another episode of Fully Booked next week. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.